Captain Sarah Chen watched through the viewport as the gleaming Zephyrian fleet approached their position. The alien ships moved with perfect precision, their crystalline hulls catching starlight like jewels against the void. Behind her, she could hear the nervous chatter of her crew aboard the UES Resilience, humanity's newest, and according to every other species in the galaxy, most pathetic excuse for a starship. The Resilience looked nothing like the elegant vessels surrounding them. Where the Zephyrian ships curved gracefully through space with smooth, flowing lines, the human ship resembled a flying scrapyard. Mismatched hull plating covered emergency repairs from their journey here. Exposed conduits snaked across the outer hull like mechanical veins. The ship's asymmetrical design came from necessity rather than aesthetics. With weapon ports cut wherever, they could fit, and engines that looked like they belonged on 3 different vessels. "Incoming transmission from the flagship," announced Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communications station. His voice carried the same tension that had gripped the entire crew since they'd received orders to attend this gathering of the Galactic Council's military representatives. "Put them through," Sarah ordered, straightening her worn uniform. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the angular features of Admiral HFY, Supreme Commander of the Zephyrian Armada. His silver eyes held the cold dismissal that Sarah had grown accustomed to seeing from alien species whenever they looked at human technology. "Captain Chen," HFY began, his translator rendering his melodic language into flat mechanical English. "I trust your vessel managed to complete the journey without falling apart entirely." Behind him, Sarah could see other Zephyrian officers struggling to contain what she assumed was their version of laughter. The Resilience performed admirably. "Admiral," Sarah replied, keeping her voice level, "we're ready to participate in the joint military exercises as requested by the Council." HFY's expression shifted to something that might have been pity. "Captain, perhaps there has been some misunderstanding. These exercises are intended for actual warships, not whatever it is you humans have assembled here." He gestured dismissively at something off-screen, presumably an image of her ship. "Your craft appears to be constructed from salvaged components and held together with primitive welding techniques. Surely the Council doesn't expect us to waste time pretending such a contraption could function in actual combat." Sarah felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but years of dealing with alien condescension had taught her patience. "With respect, Admiral, the Resilience has successfully completed 14 combat missions against Void Reaper incursions. Our unconventional design has proven quite effective. Against mindless automatons, perhaps," HFY replied with a dismissive wave. "But these exercises will test your capabilities against intelligent opponents using advanced tactics. I fear your creative approach to shipbuilding will prove inadequate." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Sarah staring at the blank screen. Around the bridge, her officers exchanged glances that mixed embarrassment with defiance. They'd all heard variations of this conversation before, but it never got easier to stomach. "Captain," Chief Engineer Martinez spoke up from his position near the rear of the bridge. "The Admiral's not entirely wrong about our appearance. I know the ship looks like a mess, but she flies and she fights and she's brought us all home safe every time," Sarah interrupted. "That's what matters." "Still," Martinez continued, "maybe we should explain to them why we build ships the way we do. The modular design philosophy, the redundant systems, the adaptive—" "They won't listen, Chief," Sarah said, settling back into her command chair. "They see primitive where we see practical. They see ugly where we see functional. Let them think what they want." The next few hours passed in a series of increasingly condescending communications from various alien commanders. The Etherian Collective's Admiral Quinteros suggested that perhaps the humans would prefer to observe the exercises from a safe distance. Commander Zelthak of the Crimson Empire offered to provide an escort ship to assist the Resilience if it suffered mechanical failures during the maneuvers. Each conversation followed the same pattern, polite concern masking barely concealed contempt for human engineering. As Sarah watched the alien fleets arrange themselves into perfect formations, she couldn't help but admire their ships. The Etherian vessels seemed to phase in and out of normal space, their translucent hulls shimmering with exotic energies. The Crimson Empire's dreadnoughts bristled with weapon arrays that could probably vaporize a small moon. The hegemony cruisers moved with predatory grace, their black hulls absorbing light like mechanical shadows. And then there was the Resilience, looking like she'd been built in someone's garage using spare parts and determination. All vessels, prepare for Exercise Alpha. Admiral Vexai's voice echoed across all frequencies. The scenario will simulate a defense of the Kepler station against a coordinated assault by Void Reaper forces. Human vessel, please maintain position in the rear guard. We wouldn't want you to interfere with established tactical doctrines. Sarah exchanged a look with her tactical officer, Commander Williams. The older man had served aboard human ships for 30 years, from the early days when Earth barely had functional spacecraft to the current era of interstellar exploration. His scarred hands moved across his console with practiced efficiency as he began calculating firing solutions for weapons that most aliens considered obsolete. "Ma'am," Williams said quietly, "our sensor array is picking up some interesting details about their fleet compositions. These ships are beautiful, no doubt about it, but they're also incredibly specialized. Each vessel seems designed for one specific role. Unlike our ugly duckling here," Sarah mused, patting the armrest of her chair. "The Resilience might not win any beauty contests, but every system aboard had been designed with one principle in mind: adapt and overcome." Human engineers had learned the hard way that space was an unforgiving environment that required flexibility above all else. The exercise began with the alien fleets demonstrating their tactical prowess. Zephyrian fighters danced through space with impossible grace, their formation flying so precise it looked choreographed. Etherian capital ships phased through enemy fire while maintaining devastating bombardments. Crimson Empire vessels hammered targets with overwhelming firepower. It was beautiful. It was elegant. It was exactly the kind of warfare that every military academy in the galaxy taught as the pinnacle of strategic thinking. And as Sarah watched it unfold, she began to smile. Because there was one thing that every other species in the galaxy had failed to understand about humans. They had learned to fight in the ruins of their own world, where nothing ever went according to plan, and survival meant making do with whatever was available. The real test was about to begin. The first phase of the exercise proceeded exactly as Admiral Vexai had planned. His Zephyrian fleet moved in perfect synchronization, their crystalline ships cutting through space like a blade through silk. The mock Void Reaper forces, controlled by advanced AI, attacked with the mechanical precision their real counterparts were known for. Every alien commander watched with satisfaction as their forces executed flawless tactical maneuvers, destroying target after target with clinical efficiency, except for one ship. Captain Sarah Chen kept the Resilience at the edge of the engagement zone, seemingly content to play the role of helpless observer that the other commanders had assigned her. But while the alien fleets focused on their choreographed battle, Sarah and her crew were busy doing something that had made humans dangerous throughout their brief but violent history: learning. "Commander Williams, what are you seeing?" Sarah asked her tactical officer as another wave of simulated Void Reapers fell to the combined alien firepower. Williams studied his displays with the intensity of a man who had survived more than his share of real battles. "Each fleet has incredible capabilities, Captain, but their fighting like this is a training exercise. Perfect formations, textbook maneuvers, no adaptation when something unexpected happens." "Define unexpected," Sarah said, though she suspected she knew where Williams was heading. "Watch the Crimson Empire squadron." Williams pointed to his tactical display. "They're using a standard hammer and anvil formation, devastating against conventional opponents. But they maintain the same spacing and approach vectors regardless of enemy response. The Etherian ships are even more predictable. They phase out of danger at precisely the same intervals every time." Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from his communication station.
"Captain, I'm monitoring their tactical frequencies."
"They're coordinating through standard military protocols, but there's no real-time adaptation. It's like they're running a computer program." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. During humanity's brief but brutal history in space, they had learned that survival often depended on doing the unexpected. Earth's military doctrine had been forged in desperate battles against superior forces, where following the textbook meant death and innovation meant another day alive. The Resilience looked like junk because it had been built like a survivor. Every mismatched piece of hull plating told a story of emergency repairs made under fire. Every jury-rigged system represented a problem solved with ingenuity rather than resources. The ship didn't follow traditional design principles because traditional design had failed humanity more than once. Chief Martinez, Sarah called to her engineering station. How are our special modifications holding up? The chief engineer's weathered face split into a grin. All systems green, Captain. The boys in R&D outdid themselves with these upgrades. The aliens think they know what they're looking at, but they've never seen anything like what we've got hiding under this ugly exterior. Admiral Vexhi's voice crackled over the communications array. All vessels prepare for Phase 2. We will now engage multiple Void Reaper battle groups simultaneously. Maintain formation discipline and execute Protocol 7. Sarah watched as the alien fleets arranged themselves into another picture-perfect formation. The Zephyrian ships took point with their superior speed and maneuverability. The Etherian vessels positioned themselves for hit-and-fade attacks using their phasing technology. The Crimson Empire dreadnoughts formed the backbone of the formation with their overwhelming firepower. The hegemony cruisers spread out to provide flanking support. It was textbook perfect. It was also exactly what Sarah had been waiting for. The simulated Void Reaper forces emerged from hyperspace in numbers that made even the experienced alien commanders pause. Hundreds of mechanical dreadnoughts, their black hulls bristling with weapons, began advancing on the Allied formation. The AI controlling them had been programmed with every known Void Reaper tactic, making them as close to the real thing as possible without actually starting a war. The alien response was immediate and overwhelming. Zephyrian fighters streaked through space, their energy weapons carving through enemy formations. Etherian ships phased in and out of reality, striking from impossible angles. Crimson Empire cannons thundered across the void, each shot capable of cracking a moon. For the first few minutes, everything went according to plan. The alien fleets worked together like a well-oiled machine, their centuries of military tradition evident in every movement. The Void Reaper formations began to crumble under the sustained assault. Then the AI did something unexpected. Instead of continuing its programmed assault patterns, it began to adapt. Void Reaper ships started targeting the most predictable elements of the Allied formation first. When Zephyrian fighters executed their standard attack run, enemy forces were waiting for them. When Etherian ships phased back into normal space, they found weapons already trained on their emergence points. "This is impossible," Admiral Vexhi transmitted across all channels, his usual composure cracking. "The Void Reapers don't adapt this quickly. They follow established behavioral patterns." Sarah smiled grimly. She had suspected this might happen. Humanity's military advisors had been warning the Galactic Council for months that the Void Reapers were evolving, becoming more unpredictable. But the alien commanders had dismissed these warnings, confident that their superior technology and traditional tactics would always prevail. The battle began to turn. Zephyrian casualties mounted as their formations encountered unexpected resistance. An Etherian cruiser materialized directly into a concentrated barrage that had been precisely calculated to intersect its phase trajectory. A Crimson Empire dreadnought found itself isolated and overwhelmed when the enemy refused to engage it, according to established protocols. "All ships, maintain formation," Vexhi ordered. But Sarah could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Execute Contingency Protocol 9. The alien fleets tried to adapt, but their tactical flexibility was limited by thousands of years of military doctrine. Their ships were marvels of engineering, but they had been designed to fight the last war, not this one. When faced with an enemy that refused to follow the rules, their perfect formations became vulnerabilities instead of strengths." "Captain," Commander Williams said quietly, "they're in trouble, real trouble. At this rate, they're going to lose the exercise." Sarah watched the tactical display as more alien ships fell to the evolving Void Reaper tactics. Each loss made the AI more aggressive, more willing to take risks that paid off against opponents who couldn't adapt quickly enough to counter them. "Captain Chen," Admiral Vexhi's voice carried a note of desperation. "Perhaps it's time for your vessel to withdraw to a safe distance. This engagement has become more challenging than anticipated." Sarah looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. These were men and women who had learned to fight with whatever they had, wherever they were, against whatever odds they faced. They had turned the battered, jury-rigged resilience into something that had earned respect through action, rather than appearance. "Negative, Admiral," Sarah replied. "The resilience is moving to engage. All hands, battle stations, let's show them what human engineering can really do. The aliens had spent the entire exercise demonstrating their superiority. Now it was time for humanity to prove that sometimes the best weapon wasn't the prettiest one. It was the one that worked when nothing else would. The bridge of the Resilience transformed as battle stations came online. Warning lights cast red shadows across familiar faces, and the steady hum of charging weapon systems filled the air. Captain Sarah Chen gripped her command chair as her ship accelerated toward the chaotic battlefield where the finest fleets in the galaxy were being systematically dismantled by an AI that had learned to think like humans. Tactical analysis. Commander Williams, Sarah ordered as they approached the engagement zone. Williams's scarred hands danced across his console, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. The AI is using adaptive ambush tactics, Captain. It's abandoning traditional Void Reaper doctrine and improvising based on observed patterns. The alien fleets can't compensate because their entire tactical framework depends on predictable enemy behavior. What about our predictability? Sarah asked. A grim smile crossed Williams's face. That's the beauty of it, Captain. We don't have any established patterns for them to analyze. This is the first time anyone's seen the Resilience in action against a major fleet engagement. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from his communication station, his face pale. Captain, I'm monitoring alien casualties. The Zephyrians have lost 30% of their fighter squadrons. The Etherian flagship just took critical damage when the AI predicted their phase emergence point. The Crimson Empire is pulling their dreadnoughts back to reform, but the Void Reapers are pursuing. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the elegant alien formations dissolving into chaos. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination minutes earlier now scattered in desperate evasion patterns. The beautiful Zephyrian vessels, their crystalline hulls designed for speed and grace, found themselves trapped in crossfires they couldn't escape. Etherian ships attempted to phase to safety only to find enemy weapons waiting for them in normal space. Chief Martinez, Sarah called to engineering. Are our modifications ready? Aye, Captain, came the response. All systems show green. The aliens are about to discover why we build ships the way we do. The Resilience didn't announce its presence with fanfare. There were no perfectly timed weapon volleys or elegant maneuvers. Instead, the battered human ship simply plunged into the middle of the largest Void Reaper formation and began doing what it did best: adapting. The first salvo from enemy weapons struck the Resilience's mismatched hull plating. Where a normal ship would have suffered catastrophic damage, the human vessel absorbed the impact across multiple redundant systems. Hull plates designed to be easily replaced in the field buckled and cracked but held. Conduits that looked like afterthoughts rerouted power around damaged sections automatically. Direct hit to Section 7, came a damage report. Hull integrity holding at 80%. Backup systems engaging. Admiral Vex High's voice crackled over the communications array. Captain Chen, withdraw immediately. Your vessel cannot withstand that level of punishment. But the Resilience wasn't trying to withstand anything. Instead, it was doing what human ships had been designed to do from the beginning: take damage and keep fighting. Williams launched the first counterstrike, and the alien observers got their first glimpse of human weapons philosophy. Instead of the focused energy beams or precisely guided projectiles favored by other species, the Resilience unleashed a barrage of weapons that defied categorization. Kinetic projectiles, energy bolts, missile swarms, and devices that seemed to bend space itself all erupted from weapon ports that had been cut into the hull wherever they would fit. The Void Reaper formation, which had been adapting successfully to the predictable patterns of alien warfare, suddenly found itself facing weapons it had never encountered before. The AI tried to calculate optimal evasion patterns, but human weapons weren't designed to follow optimal patterns. They were designed to hit targets regardless of what those targets did to avoid them. A spread of human missiles ignored traditional physics, curving through space on trajectories that should have been impossible. When Void Reaper point defense systems destroyed them, the missiles released secondary payloads that continued toward their targets. When those were destroyed, tertiary systems activated. Some missiles seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, making interception a matter of probability rather than precision. How are they doing that? Admiral Vex High transmitted, his composure finally cracking completely. Sarah smiled as she watched her weapons officer work. Human engineering philosophy, Admiral. We don't build one system to do one job perfectly. We build multiple systems to do every job adequately. and we make sure they all work together even when half of them are broken. The Resilience pressed deeper into the enemy formation, taking damage that would have crippled any other vessel. But where alien ships were masterpieces of engineering perfection, the human ship was a masterpiece of engineering pragmatism. When the primary navigation system failed, backup systems took over. When those failed, the crew manually calculated firing solutions. When weapon ports were damaged, Chief Martinez's teams cut new ones and mounted whatever guns they could find. "Captain," Williams reported, "the AI is having trouble adapting to our tactics. Every time it calculates an optimal response to our weapons, we switch to different weapons with completely different characteristics." "That's the idea," Sarah replied, watching as another Void Reaper formation tried unsuccessfully to pin down her ship. "We're not fighting this battle with superior technology or perfect tactics. We're fighting it with unpredictability and stubbornness." The tide of the engagement began to turn as the Resilience drew enemy attention away from the battered alien fleets. Void Reaper ships that had been systematically destroying opponents following predictable patterns suddenly found themselves trying to engage a target that refused to follow any patterns at all. "Incoming transmission from all Allied commanders," Rodriguez announced. Sarah nodded for him to put it through. The main screen split into multiple windows, showing the faces of alien commanders who had spent the day dismissing human capabilities. "Captain Chen," Admiral Vexhai began, his silver eyes wide with something that might have been respect. "Your tactics are unconventional." "Admiral Quinteros here," the Etherian commander added. "We are observing weapon systems and defensive measures that do not appear in any technical databases. How is your vessel maintaining structural integrity under such sustained assault?" Commander Zelthak of the Crimson Empire leaned forward in his transmission window. "More importantly, how are your weapons achieving targeting solutions that our tactical computers indicate should be impossible?" Sarah looked around her bridge at her crew, men and women who had learned to make miracles happen with spare parts and determination. The Resilience shuddered as another enemy volley struck home, but the ship kept fighting, kept moving, kept doing exactly what it had been designed to do. "The answer is simple," Sarah replied. "We didn't build the Resilience to be the best ship in the galaxy. We built her to be the ship that comes home when all the best ships have been destroyed. Sometimes that's the only advantage you need." The alien commanders exchanged glances across their transmission windows. They were witnessing something that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare, engineering, and what it meant to build a machine for war. And the battle was far from over. The battlefield had become a laboratory for chaos theory in action. While the alien fleets struggled to reform their shattered formations, the Resilience continued its impossible dance through the heart of the Void Reaper Armada. What had started as a demonstration of superior alien military doctrine had transformed into a masterclass in human survival philosophy. Captain Sarah Chen watched her tactical display with the satisfaction of someone who had spent years being underestimated. The Void Reaper AI, which had been systematically destroying the galaxy's finest warships by predicting their behavior, was now chasing shadows as the Resilience refused to behave like anything in its programming parameters. "Damage report," Sarah called out as another salvo of enemy fire raked across their hull. "Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7, came Chief Martinez's voice from engineering, "but the compartmentalization is holding. We're sealing the damaged sections and rerouting everything through backup pathways. Estimated combat effectiveness still at 78%, Sarah nodded. This was exactly what the Resilience had been designed for. Where alien ships were built as perfect systems that failed catastrophically when damaged, human engineering embraced the inevitability of failure and planned for it. Every critical system had at least 3 backups, and most of those backups had been jury-rigged from components that weren't originally designed to work together. "Captain," Commander Williams announced, "we're being hailed by Admiral Vexhai, all frequencies." The transmission opened with the Zephyrian commander's image filling the main screen. Behind him, Sarah could see the controlled chaos of his flagship's bridge as his officers struggled to coordinate a response to an enemy that had evolved beyond their tactical parameters. "Captain Chen," Vexhai began, his usual arrogance replaced by something approaching desperation, "we need to understand your tactical approach. My fleet has suffered 40% casualties, and our predictive algorithms cannot establish effective countermeasures against the Void Reaper adaptation protocols." Sarah glanced at her crew before responding. These were people who had learned to fight with whatever they had, wherever they were, against whatever tried to kill them. They had survived by being unpredictable, adaptable, and too stubborn to die when logic said they should. "Admiral, the problem with your approach is that you're still fighting the last war," Sarah replied. "Your ships are masterpieces of engineering designed to execute perfect tactics against known threats. But the Void Reapers aren't following known patterns anymore. Then how do we adapt?" This came from Admiral Quinteros of the Etherian Collective. His elegant features showed strain as he tried to process tactical concepts that his centuries of military training hadn't prepared him for. "You don't adapt," Sarah said simply. "You become unadaptable. Watch." The Resilience suddenly changed course, diving toward a concentration of Void Reaper battleships that had been herding the alien survivors into an elaborate kill zone. Instead of trying to outmaneuver the enemy formation, the human ship plowed straight through the middle of it, weapons firing in all directions. To the alien observers, it looked like suicide. The Resilience took damage that should have destroyed any vessel, but the ship's modular design meant that losing entire sections didn't significantly impact its combat capability. When the port weapon array was destroyed, the crew switched to starboard guns. When those were damaged, they broke out personal weapons and started shooting through hull breaches. "This is madness," Admiral Vexhai whispered. "No," Sarah corrected. "This is human. We don't build ships that can't be damaged. We build ships that keep fighting after they've been damaged. We don't train crews that never make mistakes. We train crews that turn mistakes into advantages." The Void Reaper AI was having the equivalent of a computational breakdown. Every time it calculated an optimal response to the Resilience's actions, the human ship would do something that wasn't optimal, but was effective. When logic dictated retreat, the humans advanced. When tactics suggested concentration of force, they scattered their efforts across multiple targets. When their weapons were destroyed, they improvised new ones from spare parts. "Chief Martinez," Sarah called. "Deploy the special package." Martinez's grin was audible in his voice. "Aye, Captain." "Deploying package Delta now." The alien commanders watched in amazement as portions of the Resilience's hull simply fell away, revealing systems that hadn't been visible on any sensor scan. What they had assumed were emergency repair patches were actually concealed weapon emplacements. Sections of hull that looked like damage from previous battles suddenly opened to reveal launch bays for devices that defied easy categorization. Those hull configurations weren't present in our initial scans. Commander Zelthak observed. "How is this possible?" "Stealth technology?" Admiral Quintero suggested. Sarah laughed. "Not stealth, Admiral. Misdirection. Everything you've been seeing as damage and jury-rigged repairs? That's just what we wanted you to see. The Resilience isn't a damaged ship held together with spare parts. It's a purpose-built war machine disguised as a damaged ship held together with spare parts." The revelation sent shockwaves through the alien command structure. They had been so focused on the ship's ugly exterior that they had missed the sophisticated systems hidden beneath the facade. The mismatched hull plating wasn't evidence of poor construction. It was adaptive armor designed to distribute damage across multiple replaceable sections. The exposed conduits weren't signs of hasty repairs. They were redundant power distribution, networks that could reroute around damage automatically. The weapons emerging from the concealed emplacements were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They fired projectiles that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, beams that curved through space to strike targets from impossible angles, and energy fields that caused enemy weapons to malfunction simply by proximity. "What are those weapons?" Admiral Vexhai demanded. "Human ingenuity," Sarah replied. "We've been at war with the Void Reapers longer than any other species. While you were perfecting your elegant tactical doctrines, we were learning how to fight an enemy that doesn't follow rules. Every weapon system on this ship was designed specifically to counter Void Reaper adaptive capabilities." The tide of battle shifted dramatically as the Resilience unleashed its true potential. Void Reaper formations that had been systematically destroying the alien fleets found themselves facing weapons and tactics they couldn't analyze or counter. The AI's adaptive protocols, so effective against conventional warfare, were useless against an opponent that refused to be conventional. "Captain Chen," Admiral Vexhai's voice carried a note of awe. "We have been Perhaps we have underestimated human military philosophy. Admiral, Sarah replied as her ship tore through another enemy formation. You've been thinking like conquerors. We learned to think like survivors. Sometimes that makes all the difference, but the real revelation was yet to come. As the Resilience continued its devastating assault on the Void Reaper forces, the alien commanders began to understand that they weren't just witnessing superior tactics or advanced technology. They were seeing the end result of a completely different approach to warfare, one forged in desperation and refined through necessity. Humanity hadn't built the prettiest ships or developed the most elegant tactics. They had built ships that refused to die and developed tactics that refused to fail, and in a galaxy that had grown comfortable with predictable warfare, that made them the most dangerous force anyone had ever encountered. The transformation of the battlefield was complete. Where moments before the galaxy's most sophisticated fleets had been in full retreat, now they watched in stunned silence as a single human ship carved through enemy formations like a knife through silk. The Resilience had become something beyond their understanding, not just a warship, but a manifestation of an entirely alien philosophy of survival. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the center of her bridge, orchestrating a symphony of controlled chaos. Around her, her crew worked with the fluid efficiency of people who had learned to function when everything was breaking down around them. Warning lights flashed, damage reports streamed in constantly, and the ship shuddered under repeated impacts, but nobody looked worried. This was exactly how they had trained to fight. "Status report on enemy formations," Sarah called out. Commander Williams studied his tactical display with the intensity of a man watching a miracle unfold. "The AI is attempting to withdraw its primary battle groups, Captain. It's lost the initiative completely. Every time it tries to establish a new tactical framework, we change our approach before it can adapt." "What about our guests?" Sarah asked, nodding toward the alien fleets that were slowly regrouping in the Resilience's wake. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from his communication station. "They're requesting permission to rejoin the engagement, Captain. Admiral Vexhai specifically asked if we could, and I quote, teach them to fight like humans." Sarah smiled grimly. The irony wasn't lost on her. Hours earlier, these same commanders had dismissed human military capabilities as primitive and ineffective. Now they were asking for lessons in tactics they couldn't comprehend. "Put me through to all Allied commanders," Sarah ordered. The main screen split into multiple windows showing the faces of alien officers who had spent their careers mastering the art of perfect warfare. Now they looked like students encountering a subject they had never imagined could exist. "Commanders," Sarah began, "if you want to rejoin this engagement, you need to understand that nothing you learned in your military academies applies here. The Void Reapers aren't following established patterns anymore, which means we can't follow established responses." Admiral Vexhai leaned forward in his transmission window. "Captain Chen, with all due respect, our tactical doctrines have proven effective for thousands of years. Surely there must be a way to integrate your methods with established military principles." "No, Admiral, there isn't," Sarah replied bluntly. "Your tactical doctrines work perfectly against enemies who follow rules. But the moment you face an opponent that thinks outside those rules, your perfectionism becomes a liability. You've spent so long optimizing your responses that you've forgotten how to improvise. Then how do we learn?" This came from Admiral Quinteros. His ethereal features showed a mixture of fascination and frustration. "How do we develop tactical flexibility when our entire military structure is based on precision and predictability?" Sarah looked around her bridge at faces that bore the scars of too many desperate battles. These people had learned flexibility because the alternative was death. They had mastered improvisation because their equipment was always breaking down at the worst possible moment. They had developed tactical creativity because they had never possessed the overwhelming technological advantages that the alien species took for granted. "Chief Martinez," Sarah called, "patch the alien commanders into our tactical frequency. Let them listen to how we actually coordinate during combat." Martinez nodded and opened the comm channels. Instantly, the alien commanders were immersed in the controlled chaos of human military communication. Instead of the formal hierarchical protocols they were accustomed to, they heard, "Rodriguez, that piece of junk in Section 12 just started working again. See if you can use it to jam their targeting sensors. Williams, the port array is dead, but I've got some mining charges left over from our last supply run. Think you can improvise some torpedoes?" Martinez here. The main power coupling is fried, but I can reroute through the coffee maker if someone doesn't mind drinking cold caffeine for the rest of the mission. Sarah, this is Lieutenant Parker in damage control. Good news and bad news. Bad news, we lost atmosphere in the forward compartments. Good news, the vacuum is actually improving our sensor resolution. The alien commanders listened in growing amazement. Where their own military communications followed strict protocols designed to maintain order and hierarchy, the humans seemed to be making up solutions in real time based on whatever resources happened to be available. This is chaos, Admiral Vexhai observed. No, Sarah corrected. This is creativity under pressure. Your people follow protocols because protocols work in predictable situations. My people improvise because we've never encountered a predictable situation. The difference in philosophy became even clearer as the engagement continued. When a Void Reaper formation tried a new tactic against the regrouping alien forces, the aliens responded by consulting their tactical databases and implementing predetermined countermeasures. It was efficient, logical, and completely predictable. The Resilience, meanwhile, responded to the same threat by doing something that made no tactical sense whatsoever. It turned off its engines and began spinning end over end while firing weapons in seemingly random directions. Captain Chen, Admiral Vexhai called urgently, you've lost attitude control. Do you require assistance? Negative, Admiral, Sarah replied calmly. This is intentional. The AI is trying to predict our movement patterns, so we're not moving in patterns. Sometimes the best tactical decision is to do something that isn't tactical. The spinning maneuver, which should have made the Resilience an easy target, instead caused complete confusion among the Void Reaper formations. The AI couldn't calculate proper targeting solutions for a ship that was moving randomly while firing weapons that seemed to guide themselves to targets, regardless of the firing platform's orientation. How are your weapons maintaining accuracy during that maneuver? Admiral Quinteros asked. They're not, Williams replied cheerfully. Half our shots are missing completely. But the other half are hitting targets that the enemy never expected us to be able to engage. Sometimes quantity has a quality all its own. It was a revelation that challenged everything the alien commanders thought they knew about warfare. They had spent centuries refining their military arts to achieve perfect efficiency, perfect coordination, perfect results. The humans had spent decades learning that perfection was the enemy of effectiveness, especially when facing enemies that refused to cooperate with perfect plans. We need to learn this approach, Commander Zelthak admitted. Our current tactical frameworks are insufficient against adaptive opponents. Then be prepared to throw away everything you think you know about military doctrine, Sarah warned. Human tactics aren't about being better than the enemy. They're about being impossible for the enemy to understand or predict. The Void Reaper AI was discovering this lesson the hard way. Every algorithm it deployed to counter human tactics was rendered useless by the simple fact that humans didn't use algorithms. They used intuition, creativity, and a stubborn refusal to accept that any problem couldn't be solved with sufficient ingenuity and determination. Admiral Vexhai, Sarah called out, if you're serious about learning human tactics, I'm going to give you your first lesson. I want your fastest squadron to follow the Resilience into the heart of that enemy formation. Don't try to coordinate with us, don't follow any predetermined patterns, and don't worry about taking damage. Just cause as much chaos as possible. Vexhai's silver eyes widened. Captain, that formation has over 300 enemy vessels. A direct assault would be suicide. Only if you're thinking like a traditional military commander, Sarah replied. But if you're thinking like a human, it's Tuesday. The alien commanders faced a choice that would define not just this battle, but their entire understanding of what it meant to wage war in a galaxy, where the rules were changing faster than anyone could adapt to them. Admiral Vexhai stared at the tactical display showing 300 Void Reaper vessels arranged in what his military training told him was an impregnable formation. Every instinct developed through centuries of Zephyrian military tradition screamed that following the Resilience into that killing field was madness. But as he watched the battered human ship prepare for another impossible assault, he realized that madness might be exactly what the situation required. Squadron 7, he transmitted to his fastest remaining ships. Form on the human vessel. We will improvise. The words felt foreign in his mouth. Improvisation was the antithesis of everything he had been taught about military command. Zephyrian doctrine emphasized perfect coordination, precise timing, and flawless execution. The idea of deliberately introducing chaos into a battle plan violated every principle of effective warfare. But effective warfare, Vex-High was beginning to understand, was exactly what had failed against the adaptive Void Reaper AI. Captain Sarah Chen watched the Zephyrian squadron fall into formation behind the Resilience and felt a mixture of pride and concern. These were ships and crews designed for precision operations, not the controlled chaos that defined human military doctrine. They were about to learn the difference between fighting perfectly and fighting effectively. All human stations, prepare for teaching Maneuver Alpha, Sarah announced across her ship's comm system. We have students today, so let's make this educational. The response from her crew was immediate and enthusiastic. Teaching Maneuver Alpha was something they had developed during their early encounters with alien military observers, a demonstration of human tactical philosophy that was designed to be as instructive as it was devastating. Chief Martinez. Deploy the emergency protocols, Sarah ordered. Which emergency protocols, Captain? Martinez replied with barely concealed glee. We've got 47 different emergency protocols and 16 of them are labeled use only in case of complete tactical impossibility. All of them, Sarah said. Let's show our guests what human engineering looks like when we stop pretending to be civilized. The transformation that overtook the Resilience was unlike anything the alien observers had ever witnessed. Sections of the ship that had appeared to be purely functional suddenly reconfigured themselves into weapon systems, hull plates that looked like amateur repair work, open to reveal sensor arrays and defensive screens. What had seemed like a jury-rigged, barely functional vessel revealed itself to be something far more sophisticated and far more dangerous. Impossible, Admiral Quinteros whispered across the comm channel. Our most advanced scanning systems detected none of those modifications. That's because you were scanning for what you expected to see, Sarah replied. Human stealth technology isn't about being invisible. It's about being invisible in plain sight. Every alien scanning protocol in the galaxy looks for sophisticated technology hidden behind sophisticated camouflage. Nobody looks for sophisticated technology hidden behind genuine junk. The Resilience accelerated toward the Void Reaper formation, and the Zephyrian squadron struggled to keep pace. Their crystalline ships were marvels of engineering elegance, but elegance was proving to be a liability in a situation that demanded adaptability above all else. Squadron 7. This is Admiral Vex-High, he transmitted to his ships. Forget everything you know about attack formations. Follow the human vessel and try to think unpredictably. It was perhaps the strangest order ever given by a Zephyrian commander, and the results were initially disastrous. The squadron tried to maintain some semblance of tactical order, while following the Resilience's chaotic approach, resulting in a formation that was neither disciplined nor effectively random. Admiral, Sarah called over the comm, you're still thinking like a formation commander. Tell your ships to stop trying to coordinate with each other and start trying to cause as much individual mayhem as possible. But that violates every principle of fleet tactics. Vex-High protested. Exactly, Sarah replied. The Void Reaper AI is predicting your responses based on principles of fleet tactics. If you abandon those principles, it can't predict anything. The human ship plunged into the enemy formation like a guided missile with delusions of grandeur. Instead of trying to fight through the Void Reaper defenses, it simply ignored them. When enemy weapons fired, the Resilience absorbed the damage and kept moving. When blocking formations tried to intercept, the human ship went around them, through them, or in one memorable instance, underneath them using a gravitational slingshot maneuver that shouldn't have been possible with conventional physics. The Zephyrian squadron, watching this display of tactical insanity, finally began to understand what Sarah meant about abandoning principles. Admiral Vex-High made a decision that would have resulted in court-martial under normal circumstances. All ships, individual initiative, he ordered. Choose your own targets, choose your own tactics, choose your own definition of success. The only rule is that there are no rules. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Freed from the constraints of coordinated tactics, the Zephyrian pilots began to fight like individuals rather than components of a machine. One ship decided to ram a Void Reaper cruiser, ejecting at the last moment and leaving the enemy vessel dealing with a crystalline projectile, traveling at significant fractions of light speed. Another pilot began using his ship's phase capabilities not for hit-and-run attacks but for psychological warfare, appearing and disappearing randomly to create the illusion of multiple vessels. The Void Reaper AI, which had been successfully adapting to predictable alien tactics for hours, suddenly found itself facing opponents who weren't following any tactics at all. Its behavioral analysis algorithms began producing error messages as it tried to process enemy actions that made no logical sense from a military perspective but were proving devastatingly effective in practice. "This is working," Admiral Vexhai reported with amazement in his voice. "The enemy formations are breaking down. They can't coordinate responses to attacks that aren't coordinated." "Now you're beginning to understand," Sarah replied as the resilience carved through another group of confused Void Reaper vessels. "Humans learned a long time ago that the best way to defeat a superior enemy is to make them fight your kind of war instead of their kind of war." The lesson was spreading throughout the alien fleets as other commanders watched the success of Vexhai's squadron. Etherian vessels began abandoning their elegant phasing maneuvers in favor of rapid, random appearances that left enemy forces constantly guessing. Crimson Empire dreadnoughts stopped trying to establish optimal firing positions and instead began using their massive bulk as psychological weapons, charging enemy formations regardless of defensive fire. But it was the humans who provided the masterclass in organized chaos. The Resilience continued its impossible journey through the heart of the enemy fleet, taking damage that should have destroyed it a dozen times over, but somehow continuing to fight. Every hit was absorbed by redundant systems. Every system failure was compensated by backup equipment, and every backup failure was solved by crew members who had learned to improvise solutions from whatever materials happened to be available. "Captain Chen," Admiral Quintaros called across the comm channels, "how do we know when we've won? Your tactical approach doesn't seem to have traditional victory conditions." Sarah looked at her tactical display, where Void Reaper formations were dissolving into individual vessels fleeing in random directions. The AI had finally encountered something it couldn't adapt to: opponents who changed their approach faster than any algorithm could process. "Admiral," she replied, "with traditional tactics, you know you've won when the enemy stops fighting according to their doctrine. With human tactics, you know you've won when the enemy stops fighting altogether." And across the battlefield, that was exactly what was happening.